Speaking of really important conversations from the media, Justin Trudeau and Katy Perry. Do you think they're a good match? What do you think?
They probably are a good match,
I
which
know,
is
I think
terrible.
so too. And I kind of think that's like insulting to both of them.
I also think like I think Justin Trudeau dating Katy Perry is kind of like an insult to Canadians personally. Like this is our former
I
prime
thought there
minister.
were
He should
rumors he
not
was
be
dating
shaming
someone
us in
from
this way.
Newfoundland, you know? Like that would
This
be
is what
so
I
much more
thought. Yeah.
patriotic. No wonder you're extra
I
pissed,
know.
eh?
Yeah. There were like rumors he was down here and was dating I don't know, maybe that was all bullshit. I have
Just
no
small
idea. This is what was
small town
circulating.
chit chat, like rumors
Exactly.
spreading like
Exactly.
wildfire around the rock.
Yeah. But it's like I don't know, Justin, like, what are you doing, man? Come on. I would just say, Justin, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Call the nuns, Justin. Check in with the
Yeah.
nuns. They have stories. Hello, I'm Rachel Gilmore, your least favorite person's least favorite journalist. Welcome to Bubble Pop, the weekly show where we break down the biggest headlines and juiciest news tidbits so you don't have to doom scroll. Today is our season finale before I take a little break for the summer. I'll be back after Labor Day though, so don't think you're getting away that easy. But before I let you go relax and soak up the sun, we gotta talk about the state of Canadian politics. We've got a prime minister who's ruling like a conservative. We've got conservatives who are acting like MAGA Republicans. We've learned even more about Canada's complicity in Israel's genocide in Gaza. And Justin Trudeau might be dating Katy Perry? It's a lot. So I think I need a good friend to help me through it. That means, you guessed it, fan favorite Paris Marx is back on the show. Paris is the host of the podcast Tech Won't Save Us. He is a tech critic, an author, a podcaster, and one of my very good pals. He was also my first podcast guest on this season, so I think it's fitting that he helped me bookend season one. Paris, welcome to Bubble Pop again.
Thanks so much. I've never been on this show before. I'm
I
excited to
know.
see how bubbles pop.
I'm excited to see you for the first time in my life ever. You look different than I
Do we
expected.
need?
I thought you'd
Oh,
be
thanks.
blonde.
No, always been brown hair with the more and more gray as it happens.
It's called being a silver fox, okay? That's what you're
Oh,
working towards there.
I'll
Yeah.
take it. I'll take it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm scared for when I go gray because I'm ginger and I feel like it's going to be hard to color match, and like get rid of those. So just pluck them until
I'm
they're
not even
bald.
color matching. I'm just letting it do its thing, you know?
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Ride the
Yeah.
ride the silver wave.
I'd imagine like when people with ginger hair like go gray, it'd be like a lighter gray or no? I don't know.
I have no idea. I feel like it's kind
Okay.
of all over the place. Like my granddad still had ginger in his white when he was like very
Oh,
elderly. So you never
interesting.
know. You never know. But he was kind of more of like a vibrant orange than I've ever been.
Okay.
So I'm a little more auburn. Anyways, I'm sure this is really thrilling
I
for
need
the
to remain your
listeners.
friend just so I see what happens.
Exactly. Yeah. Now that we've met for the first time, we can start this long and
Exactly.
beautiful friendship. So, okay. So, Paris, you were, oh, my immediate line in my script here is destroying the premise of our joke. You were my co host on the election
Yeah.
miniseries, Campaign Cops. Since then, Mark Carney has
You
been
just
a
have amnesia. That's all.
I
It's
know.
okay.
I just like
Yeah.
immediately forget everyone that I've ever met. Um, since then, Mark Carney has introduced and implemented his first bits of legislation. He's been a very busy boy. He's made concessions to Trump, including on the digital services tax. We haven't gotten a ton in return. What do you think of Prime Minister Mark Carney so far? Big fan? Stan?
No. He's progressive conservative Carney. Like, let's be real.
Yeah. Yes.
Sure, we kept a liberal government, but we got one that is basically as conservative as you can hope to get with a liberal party. Uh, you know, as you were saying, he went to the election, he went to the public saying it would be elbows up against Donald Trump, that we would be pushing back against the United States and, not allowing Donald Trump, not allowing this country to like push us around and whatnot. And we saw right after the election ended, really, that kind of rhetoric slowly start to get toned down. The kind of comments that Mark Carney would be open to Canada participating in the Golden Dome, a completely ridiculous, attempt to remake Israel's Iron Dome system in North America. We really don't need that,
No.
but. And of course, Canada has long been opposed in participating in these sorts of projects, but of course, Mark Carney, threw that to the side in order to try to get some brownie points with Donald Trump. He kind of praised him when he went down to the Oval Office. As you were saying, he got rid of the digital services tax just because Trump threatened him and said, talks would be over if he didn't do it. That's on top of all of the legislation that he has passed that seems ill-advised at best, and even worse. If we're thinking about the worst case scenarios, we think about the middle class tax cut, which is going to blow a huge hole in the budget, which with not much real benefit to many Canadians, I would argue. I think that money would be much better spent on collective priorities rather than just giving people a little bit of individual, additional kind of cash. Obviously the repeal of the carbon tax, which is something that we expected to see happen. But I kind of miss my carbon rebate check personally. I know you're in Quebec, you don't get those, but the rest of us, we used to. And then of course the border bill, which is incredibly draconian,
Yeah.
and these other measures that are really terrible. I would say the one kind of good thing I would say about Mark Carney, and I think this is a bit more of just the moment that we're in rather than Mark Carney himself, um, is the way that there does seem to be this dialogue between the federal government and the provinces in a way that we haven't seen in a productive sense in a very long time. And I think that that is actually welcome, because I think that our country has become far too decentralized, and for far too long we've had kind of provinces squabbling with one another and not thinking about the national interest, and even the federal government not really being willing to think about the national interest, and actually kind of building a country in the way that Mark Carney is talking about. Like, this is the one aspect of kind of Carneyism, or the kind of Carney government that still has me, is this talk of kind of nation building projects. We've yet to see what those are going to be, but I do think that there's a real need, if we want Canada to be a proper country, to actually knit this country together through infrastructure, through collective projects, in a way that many governments haven't been willing to do in decades. And so that is the one kind of part of the Carney government where I'm still holding out hope that we will see some good things come of this. Obviously, there's the questions of what it means for Indigenous people, First Nations, and things like that. And I know that's an ongoing conversation, and we'll see where that goes. I think it was really ill-advised the way that they handle those consultations. But yeah, that's kind of like generally how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, that's a good. You kind of covered all the bases there, but on that last one, I do think that we might see some interesting stuff come out of the major projects legislation. Like, I worked on a piece with the National Observer, based on their really incredible investigating, where they looked at the potential projects we might see. And while there was a lot of fossil fuel stuff, there was also some really interesting ones that seemed more positive, that had to do with like wind energy and national energy, like connectivity, and connecting different grids. And so that stuff is interesting. I do think it's problematic that they have given themselves powers to just override so many like consultation processes and legislation on things like species at risk, where they can just, if a species is going to go extinct because you go ahead with a project, that can be overridden as a concern and stuff like that. So I think that there's, it's a one of those bold things that I think they could have done a better job of if they hadn't rushed it through so fast. And I think that's kind of indicative of a lot of stuff that Carney has done, where there might be some good ideas in some of it, but it almost feels rushed, like the way that he's drafting things and the way that, unless, and maybe I'm being too generous, maybe it's intentional and he genuinely doesn't care about those things, but there's been moments where I've heard things from, individuals who are speaking to Justice Department officials, for example, and they'll point out something in the legislation being like, no, this is where this does a bad thing. And people will be like, I didn't notice that. And it's like, you guys are supposed to be the ones who know that. Like, you're the ones working on this legislation. So, it's I feel like I'm seeing some markers that they're moving a bit too fast. And that's not great. But
Yeah, well, and I think that partially comes out of like Carney really does seem to feel or seem to see himself as like the CEO in chief, right? I
yeah.
think he sees himself less as a prime minister and more as the chief executive of Canada at the moment. And that implies a different way of governing and engaging with consultation and those sorts of questions, right? A different way of approaching power in a sense. And I do think that there is a legitimate argument to be made that, we haven't been able to get things done to a certain degree because
Yeah.
processes tend to take so long within the federal government. I do think that that is a legitimate criticism, right? But the question is, what is the right way to try to address those long timelines, to try to address the way that that caused costs to balloon, in a way that still protects rights, is still concerned about environmental impacts and things like that. And I think that's kind of what we're working through at the moment, where it seems quite clear that his attempts to override these rules, as you're saying, are creating a lot of serious and legitimate concerns from Indigenous people, from environmental groups, concerns that I share. Um, and the question is, is there, or what would be the better way to do this? And I
Yeah.
think that just because Carney has moved so fast, and because he does still have so much of the public behind him, and really so much of the media willing to, kind of, what would you say? Really kind of give the benefit of the doubt to his project, um, that you really don't see those kinds of other conversations or like what would be another way to do this, kind of questions really being asked. And I do think that's a discussion that we need to be having, but unfortunately, the conversation is not really there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that on that topic too, one thing that I found that I struggled with, and I think that you came up against this a bit too, was there was a lot of love for Mark Carney, and I don't think that that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's fine for people to
Mhm.
like their prime minister, but when he
Remember how much
started.
people loved Justin Trudeau when he was first elected?
Yeah, exactly. um, but yeah, like when Carney started making these policy moves that were more conservative, and people like you and I started raising the alarm, and many others too, um, we got absolutely like bodied online. Like there's just some real hardcore Carney supporters. And I think one thing that I heard a lot was that, he's just started, give him some time. He's just getting his sea legs. And I'm kind of like, well, behind the scenes, he's actually been trying to get in this position for some time. So this isn't really that new. And I don't really think that prime minister is a job where like you can really give people a ton of slack for like learning the ropes, because the mistakes that they make in that process can have nation changing implications. So, but it was almost hard to report on him initially. But I'm starting to notice that change, and Canadians are becoming more receptive to an understanding that it's not a condemnation of them or how they may have voted, to turn around and sort of criticize or have these tough conversations about what Mark Carney is actually doing while in office. But I wanted to ask you, like, why do you think Canadians were so defensive of Mark Carney?
Yeah, I think there's a really obvious reason, right? I think Canada is being threatened right now by the
Yeah.
United States. I think that is the main reason that Mark Carney was elected. I think a lot of the early criticisms were not about the way that he was relating to the United States, or it was still quite early in that relationship. So, I do think that to a certain degree, it's understandable that some people would say, "Listen, he's just started here. let's give him a bit more time to see how this goes. And they were not as concerned with some of the other legislative efforts that he was engaged in and some of the other ways that he was acting. And they were kind of saying, we need to support our prime minister right now because he is dealing with Donald Trump and what have you, right? So I think that that is kind of
Yeah.
the position that some of these folks had. Um, I do think that there's also another kind of group of people who are just diehard Carney heads. And I
Yeah.
think I feel like part of that is like the importation of a certain political culture from the United States, right? Where you
Yeah.
have these people who are like diehard Democrats. Democrats can do no wrong. Watching MSNBC all the time. That type of an individual who is going to defend the Democrats until the end. And I think you had a certain degree of that kind of, because we have a lot of people in Canada, a lot of people of a certain age group who spend a lot of time watching that media as well, very engaged in kind of the Trump timeline and the American politics reality show. And so I think that they were kind of importing that way of engaging with politics into Canada. And so then relating that to Mark Carney. That's how I understand part of that as well, especially those more really aggressive people who really wanted to oppose any criticism of Carney. And I think part of the reason that has changed is because we just have, a longer period of time now to see how this has been going. And I don't think a lot of the growing concern about what Carney is doing is related to, say, the border bill or the carbon tax or the middle class tax cut or even the revocation of the digital services tax. It is more about seeing how um, this relationship with Donald Trump and these negotiations with the United States are going and saying, this really isn't working out how we planned. Um, you know, if we were supposed to be elbows up, and then all of a sudden a lot of that language disappeared. And now it seems like Donald Trump is just steamrolling over us. And where is this Mark Carney that was sold to us during the campaign that doesn't seem to be here anymore? And so I feel like, for us, we're disillusioned for other reasons, looking at, the government's, position toward Israel and Gaza, we're looking at the border bill, the violation of people's rights that we can potentially see incoming there,
Yeah.
other reasons like that for them, for some of these people, it's very much focused on that relationship with the US, and that is really not working out how Mark Carney suggested it would.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's kind of struck me is like just the degree to which he's capitulating. Like I even had a
Mhm.
liberal source tell me that like they jokingly gave him the nickname Capitulation Carney, and that's someone who is a like liberal and so like there's those conversations behind the scenes. And I mean, like the example of the digital service tax is a really good one because the UK has one as well. The UK is currently in trade negotiations with Trump as well, and they haven't reneged on that. Now, you
Yep.
could make the argument that Trump, he gets things in his head and he did fixate on our digital services tax, especially. And he wasn't really talking about it with respect to the UK. So maybe he just hasn't realized that they have one and or hasn't gotten like lobbied hard on that particular front. But I do think that it is a worrying sign that our elbows up prime minister is caving in areas where other world leaders who he seems to be modeling his governance style in large part after are still holding firm. So I don't know. I that to me was sort of revealing.
I
Um,
also think it makes less sense to a degree as well, because like, okay, we have these other countries that are holding on to their digital services taxes, right?
yeah,
But Canada is also in a different position with regards to the United States as those countries as well,
that's
right?
true.
So if you look at the UK or the European Union or Japan or whoever, I would argue that they are even more incentivized to want to get a deal with the United States, um, because if they don't, virtually everything that comes out of their economy is going to be hit with a 30, 35%, 50% tariff or whatever, right? And it's crushing. And so you see that with the deal that the European Union agreed to with Trump, or that the European president did, Ursula von der Leyen, recently, and obviously that was criticized as being basically a capitulation to Trump, and I think that's accurate. I really don't think the Europeans came out very well in that deal, but you can also see the argument that you've seen some from some political leaders in Europe where they basically say this is a bad deal, we don't like it, but also a 15% tariff is better than a 30 or 35% tariff. And so even if we're selling this out, even if this is the deal that we're being sold, then we're just going to have to take it for now because it seems like for the most part this is what most countries are getting, right? And so
Yeah.
I think they one were more legitimized to want to try to get leverage with Trump and to try to get on good terms and things like that because the potential implications were far worse. I think in Canada's case, we are less concerned about that broader tariff rate because we have CUSMA,
Yeah.
the kind of follow up to NAFTA, and a very significant amount of our trade, regardless of the tariff rate that Donald Trump sets, is tariff free because it operates under that agreement. And so our trade works very differently. Our trade and the Mexicans' trade works very differently than a lot of other countries would with the United States. And so our negotiators are much more focused on the steel and aluminum tariffs, the auto tariffs, the sectoral tariffs that were less of certainly a concern, but less so for those other players, right? And so when you think about the discussions that we're having now, we're obviously recording this before August 1st, the most recent
Yeah.
deadline that was set in these talks. So we'll if something comes of it, we won't necessarily know about that by the time this is published.
Yeah, it's currently Wednesday in the early afternoon, Wednesday, July 30th. So if anything happens after this, we
Exactly.
didn't know about it.
But it's like if there's not a deal, I think that's less harmful to Canada than it would be if, say, the European Union had no deal or the UK
Yeah.
had no deal, because so much of our trade is already tariff free. And our real concern is less that broader tariff rate, though of course we would like it to be zero, and more those sectoral tariffs that hit key industries within Canada that we want to see reduced, but that we can see from the agreements with the UK, with Europe, with Indonesia, with Japan are largely staying in place in those other countries as well. And so I think our ability to actually get rid of those sectoral tariffs is very limited. And so then the question becomes, is it really in our interest to sign some bad deal where we have to give a lot of stuff away, or just to say, we're going to ride it out, we're going to see what happens in the midterms or what have you. And all because the other piece, the final piece, is that if we do agree to a bad deal now, that's not legally enforced and could be overturned in the courts and all this kind of stuff, it could set a precedent for the CUSMA USMCA renegotiation that happens next year that could put us in a really bad position going into that. So that is in mind as well. I
Yeah.
know trade wasn't really necessarily on our agenda, but like
No, no,
this is
no.
a key piece of
It
what we're thinking
is.
about, right? Yeah,
Yeah, and I also think that, one thing that I do try to catch myself on, um, and I don't want to cut Carney too much slack with respect to the whole like elbows down thing, but I don't know how I would do this. And like I don't know how you deal with someone who's clearly not negotiating in good faith and who is so unpredictable and angry, right? And so it's a really difficult tightrope to walk. And so it's as much as it's easy for me to criticize him as capitulating, I do try to catch myself a little bit and have the self-awareness to be like, but this is a wild situation and I don't know what the answer is. So it's much easier to chirp from the sidelines than to actually do it. So I do just want to acknowledge that. But one thing that I have been really disappointed on, and I think you have as well. Well, I know you have as well, has been the genocide in Gaza. And that's an area where I think there is a more clear cut course of action and things that Carney could be doing. And once again, I do think that this is also has ties to the US because I think that there's a lot of fear of enraging Trump because of the US Israel dynamic. But Carney promised to be a leader on the international stage. That was something Canadians thought they were voting for. It was something he said repeatedly: if the US won't lead, we will. Um, and we are not leading on this issue. We are pure followers. We only seem to act in tandem with other countries. We never strike out on our own like France just did to recognize the state of Palestine. That's another thing that there might be news on after this, because there was actually a report on CBC's The National last night where they were talking about how sources were saying that the government is actively discussing recognizing the statehood of Palestine. So again, sorry, the timing of this is difficult for our podcast.
Yeah, there are
But
Liberal MPs pressuring, like we saw in the UK, effectively in the Labour
yeah,
Party.
yeah. And, but on the flip side, a massive report just came out this week detailing hundreds of Canadian arms shipments to Israel. And this is while Gazans are starving because of Israel's blockade, which is a man made famine. And what our government announced in response to that this week was that we're providing an additional 30 million in funding for humanitarian aid in Gaza to, quote, pre-position aid in the region in order to ensure that it is distributed efficiently and at scale. And in that statement, we said, quote, this aid must be allowed to reach those in desperate need. But we didn't describe why it can't and why that is being prevented. I guess I touched on some potential reasons, but I want to hear your thoughts on like, why do you think it's so hard for our government to have the moral backbone on the world stage that Carney implied he would have when he was campaigning?
That's a, I think that's a big question.
It is,
You know,
yeah. Why does the world let bad things happen, Paris? Why do our
yeah.
leaders allow atrocities? Please tell me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wish I had the answer that would allow us to like overcome it, right?
Yeah,
I think
truly.
more broadly, why is the Canadian government and so many Western governments really unwilling to say the types of things about Israel that they have been very willing to say about Russia, and other countries in the world that are abusing human rights is because of politics and because of that broader relationship with the United States. But I also think part of it is just basic racism, that the lives of Palestinians do not matter nearly as much as the lives of Israelis or other folks, right? And also because of the longstanding acceptance of the apartheid system in Israel. And the fact that they have been completely okay with this for decades. Even today we see the continuation of these um, statements that, oh, we need a two-state solution, or like you were saying earlier, we need aid to resume. And it's like they know the reality of why a two-state solution is what not happening, why not enough aid is getting in. But again, they won't criticize the government of Israel for not doing so. Um, I think it becomes increasingly appalling. And like, I really think that there's more and more Canadians who are just outraged at the government about this. I speak to people who are not watching all this stuff all the time in the way that we are, and who are not as engaged or informed about the history of Israel's oppression of Palestinians and the seizure of their land and the Nakba and all this kind of stuff. And they're just seeing starving kids on the TV screen every day and are outraged that the government is not doing more about this and don't understand, why that is the case, right?
Yeah.
And we hear like Anita Anand and we hear these politicians talk about it, and we always hear that Hamas needs to release the hostages, right? They need to include that in every answer. I never hear them say that Israel needs to release the Palestinian hostages, of which there are many, many more than the
Yes.
Israelis being held in Gaza.
I've directly asked them about
Increasingly,
that and they don't even acknowledge it. Like, yeah,
yeah, right. Because it's one of these things that is just out of the conversation, right?
yeah,
The fact that Israel would do this is just not something that is allowed to be talked about. Increasingly, as we're having these discussions about the two-state solution and what this would look like, there was this conference at the UN this week.
yeah.
The one thing that we always hear these political leaders say is that Hamas can't be part of any future Palestinian state. You never hear them say that Ben Gvir, Smotrich,
Yeah. The
the kind
Likud
of movements
party.
that they represent. Exactly.
Yeah.
Netanyahu, who is charged with war crimes, the war crime
Yeah.
of starvation, that they can't be part of the leadership of the Israeli state. Why is that? Why is this focus on the leadership of the Palestinian state and not on the Israeli state in that way? Increasingly as well, um, you know, one of the things that they're talking about is that any future Palestinian state needs to be demilitarized. So why does a Palestinian state need to be demilitarized, but the Israeli state that is committing a genocide, that is enforcing an apartheid system, does not need to be demilitarized, and we're actually, as you said, supplying arms to that state. This is the kind of stuff that we know why there is this hypocrisy, but it just makes you so angry to see it, right?
Yeah.
Because
Makes
it's
you
it,
feel
it it
powerless
shows so
too.
clearly that the hypocrisy and how international law and all this stuff just doesn't matter, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's literally I I was on the phone with a government source yesterday about asking questions about this, the arms flowing to Israel from Canada, and we got on the topic of the loophole that is, sending companies sending parts to the U.S. and then the U.S. shipping them to Israel. Something that Melanie Joly explicitly said, it does not matter how these arms are getting to Israel. Canadian arms shouldn't be getting to, or Canadian goods shouldn't be getting to Israel that are arming this genocide. Well, she didn't say genocide, obviously. That would be a big deal. But,
Yeah.
but,
I
but,
believe that
that's
humanitarian catastrophe or
exactly.
something is as far as they're allowed to go now.
Catastrophe
Yeah.
too. It's just like, it's
Yeah.
like a natural disaster. I mean, it's just wild. But, anyway, but I literally said, like, what if those arms were going to Russia? Like obviously the US wouldn't be, I mean, as far as I know, arming Russia. But like, what if that was the case? Wouldn't you crack down on that? Wouldn't you feel an obligation to do so? And
Yeah, like what if we were sending them to India and they were passing them on to Russia or something, right?
exactly. Like that would prompt outrage. And additionally, it would prompt outrage from our media. And I do think that our media, they did press. That's why they got that answer from Jolie, was because they did press on the question of that US loophole. But I just think that um, there are decisions that are made that by the media that then allow governments to get away with these milquetoast answers on a question of something as horrifying as a genocide, in which we have Canadian doctors who are providing evidence of messages they've sent to other doctors in Gaza who have told them that baby formula is confiscated when they enter Gaza. Baby formula. What reason? For what reason do you confiscate baby formula? What is the purpose of that during a famine? There is only one reason you would do that, and it is to genocide, to eradicate a people, to eradicate the next generation of a people. And I'm losing my train of thought here, frankly, because it's so frustrating, the appalling hypocrisy of it all. And I do think that if there were ever a reason to accept the wrath of Donald Trump, um, refusing to participate in one of the worst atrocities, I would argue the worst atrocity that we've witnessed in our lifetime, is absolutely a good enough reason to piss off Donald Trump. But we're profiting from this. I mean, like, we've got arms companies that are sending stuff to Israel. So like, it's just beyond,
But
and
it
it's a moral failure.
absolutely. But and it's not even like I would say this is not as unique as we try to make it look, right?
Yeah.
I remember I grew up in the 90s. I remember the talk of the genocide in Rwanda, right?
Yeah.
And how after that occurred, the discourse I remember at the time was that this never should have happened, that the international community should have got in there and stopped it and done more to try to save lives instead of allowing this genocide to continue. And what a moral disgrace it was that the West kind of stood back and allowed this to happen, right? And Now, of course, we see another one in front of our eyes. And again, they're standing back because, oh, it's politically inconvenient and blah, blah, blah. Or, even if you think about our own history in Canada, and I don't think it's entirely accurate, but this is the story that we like to tell, is how brave Ryan Mulrooney was to stand up to the UK and the US and to turn against apartheid South Africa and say, under a conservative government, progressive conservative government, that Canada was not going to be dealing with this apartheid state, right? Um, you know, we kind of hold that up. Brian Mulrooney died not too long ago, and that was a big part of the narrative that the media, that the political class wanted to sell about this figure. Like, look at the difference that he made on the world stage, and that Canada can make. Um, and in this moment, we are supporting that apartheid state. We are supporting the genocide that is going on, and our leaders are too cowardly to stand up against that because they might feel some wrath from the United States. And I think even now, where we look at this discussion about recognizing a Palestinian state, like, it's so stupid that that is even the discussion that we're having right now, right? Um, and really, and you can see it in the way that the UK is talking about this. Like, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, he wasn't going to recognize a Palestinian state, and then he came out and said, "You know what? We are going to do it, but only if you, Israel, um, keep slaughtering Palestinians. If you stop slaughtering Palestinians and give them food and stuff, then we won't actually recognize
Yeah.
the right of Palestinians to self-determination." It's like,
The
what weird
recognition of
world are we living in?
A Palestinian state as a threat instead of
Yeah.
a right. Like, it's absurd. And frankly, you're right when you say, like, it's so stupid that this is what we're spending our time talking about this. And obviously, I'm not trying to diminish the importance of the Palestinian right to self-determination, because it is
Hmm.
incredibly important. Israel has food, or Israel is holding food at the border right now. That is an urgent thing that the international community needs to demand that they release. And you can do that through sanctions. You can do that. There's all kinds of political levers that you can pull to put that pressure on the Israeli government. And we are having meetings at the United Nations where people are just opining on Palestinian statehood and making funding announcements to pre-position aid without actually dealing with the heart of the problem, which is that Israel is depriving the access. Like, it's appalling to see that there is an urgent and relatively easy fix here. We just have to get Israel to stop to
Hmm.
stop not allowing aid to flow. And that would save lives. And this tide is finally turning as people are entering phase 5 of famine. So we are finally having some shift in the conversation. And really, the shift is about Palestinian statehood. It's still not about sanctioning Israel. It's still not about, acting on arrest warrants for Netanyahu. It's about Palestinian statehood rather than Israel's actions, at a time when many Palestinians are past the point of no return with respect to the starvation. They're dealing with epigenetic damage, gene damage, the kind that is still visible in some descendants of the Irish potato famine to this day. They are dealing with brain damage, with damage they can't come back from even if they got food today. And that is not to say that they should not get that food immediately still. We should still be pushing that with as much ferocity as ever. But I can't help but feel like a lot of the people who are changing their tune now are preparing their post-genocide rhetoric where they pretend they weren't complicit. And that is what is just morally disfiguring in all of this. Um,
And, like, let's be clear here. I think if you actually got the Canadian government to be honest, I think what they would say is, listen, even if we, turned against Israel or whatever, held them to account for their crimes, um, I think they would argue that it won't make a difference anyway because they still have the United States supporting them, right? I think if they were being truly honest, this is the argument that they would make. And my argument in response to that would be, I believe that if Canada, if the European Union, if Japan and South Korea and Australia and New Zealand and all of the global south that is behind the Palestinian cause actually came together and said, you know what? We're sanctioning Israel as a state, not just,
Yeah,
Ben-Gvir
not
and
just
Smotrich and
exactly.
whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and we are holding them to account. We are saying you need to let the aid in. You need to, we are going to make a Palestinian state happen whether you like it or not. Um, that the United States could only hold out against that pressure for so long. The United States is a powerful force. It's not the powerful force it once was, and I don't think it can stand against the rest of the world. Um, and so it's for that reason that I really don't buy the arguments that the government is making that they can't do it. Like there's the moral depravity in what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
But I also think that the political calculation is just completely wrong. And I think that also relates to what we just see with the broader way that they treat this relationship to the US. I think the US can kind of pick off all of these countries in trade talks because once again, all of these countries are not coming together to act in their collective interest or the collective interest of the world, to address these issues. And that gives the US more power than it would otherwise have. That they can use with tariffs and trade wars, but that they can also use to support the continued Israeli apartheid system and the genocide against Palestinians. And so, I think until our governments really grow a backbone, then unfortunately, this is the state we're stuck in.
Yeah. And I honestly I don't know how we can forgive ourselves ever for that. Like, that's just something that I'm personally grappling with, like knowing that our leadership is so comfortable just utterly ignoring its people who are begging it to act in a situation that is so objectively wrong. It's just, it's hard to it's hard to wrap your mind around and still see the world the same way. And maybe I just never should have seen it the way I did before this in the first place. But yeah, it's a hard thing to wrap your mind around. And yeah, you look like you're going to say
I,
something. Yeah,
yeah, I would agree with you,
yeah,
but at the same time, I would say we always move past these things. We always normalize
yeah, we
them
do.
in history. If you look at Rwanda, right, we moved past that. If you look at apartheid South Africa, we moved past that and we made up a story that we were okay with. Um, you know, uh, we're a country that was founded on a genocide of
Yeah,
of indigenous people in our own country, right? Like let's be real about that. And not only had did for years did we just sweep that under the rug and pretend that it never happened, but now that we're trying to sort of make amends for it, even then it's like what are we really doing? If you look at what Carney is doing with relation to these national projects and stuff, it's clear that his goal with indigenous consultation is buying off indigenous groups, right? Trying to
yeah,
see how much it costs to get them on side. Um, we have never really properly reckoned with the genocide that Canada was built on. And now, at a moment where we try to present ourselves as this defender of human rights and international law, as a country that is reconciling with the indigenous groups, that that our ancestors committed a genocide against, we are actively supporting a genocide that is occurring in Israel by a supposed ally of ours, right? So, like, yes, it's shocking, but it's also not shocking
yeah. It's what we're built
uh,
on.
yeah, because
Yeah,
of how common it is, and because of how we always dismiss and find a way to tell a different story about these things. It's like Israel is Canada at a very early stage. Obviously, there are very big differences. There are very distinct aspects of the genocide and the settler colonial project in Canada versus in Israel, but they're still settler colonies, right?
Yeah.
It's we're a country that was very successful in carrying out its genocide, and then wrote a story to make that seem okay. Um, Israel is at a place where it is kind of probably at the peak of its genocidal fervor, and it's hoping it can get through that and get to the other side and maintain control over the territory that it wants. Um, and I think it's on us to make sure that that doesn't happen, that it's not allowed to get away with that. Um, and I think it very much remains to be seen as to whether that will be the case.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's actually an integral point, is that we can't allow that story to be rewritten. And
Totally.
and also we should take that and turn it inwards and, look at the ways in which we're rewriting our own stories and push back on that within ourselves. Because I think you're totally right. And I do also think that, frankly, some of the hangups and hesitations that Canada has with respect to calling out Israel is rooted in that sense of identity and the questions it raises within our own country, of the things that we've done and the precedents that we have set and normalized and decided are okay, in the way that we've decided to tell that story to ourselves. Now, I know that you and I could talk about this like at length, and I mean we have, because it is like genuinely, I feel like it's the most important thing right now, personally. But I did want to devote a little bit of time before we wrap up today to talking about the shift. I mean, we talked about Mark Carney's government, we talked about the world stage, and now I want to look at the opposition in our country. And
We have an opposition? What?
I know, right? Well, he's coming back soon, that's for sure. um, and that is like the one thing we kept hearing from folks defending Carney, is that, well, at least he's not Pierre Poilievre. And they're not wrong, in the sense that while Carney is center right, the Conservatives are going like far right. I think the most recent example of that is their full throated, like several Conservative MPs and Pierre Poilievre also amplifying these posts, defense of the MAGA preacher Sean Foyt, who's a Christian nationalist who has previously had a Proud Boy among those who were doing security for him when he was claiming to cast demons out of downtown Portland. It just kind of like it makes me
Every
feel
city
like
needs its demons to be cast out, though, right?
oh, absolutely. I mean, but I want to go to the city where all those demons land, because I think that sounds fun.
Okay.
But I do think that it's this interesting thing we're seeing right now, where the liberals are acting like conservatives, so the conservatives are having to act even further right, or maybe that is just their want. But do you think that the Overton window, that's sort of the scope of acceptable discourse, the kind of discourse that we accept in our politics, has shifted to the right? And like, why do you or do you not think that's the case?
Yeah, there's no question in my mind, and I think
Yeah.
that we've seen that happening for some years, right? Even in the like latter couple of years of the Trudeau government, the narrative in the media was that the Trudeau Liberals were too far left, and they were focused too much on social policy than economic policy and economic growth, and we needed a grown-up like Mark Carney, because like they were explicitly campaigning for Mark Carney to be prime minister and Liberal leader. Let's be clear about
Yeah.
that for quite some time, right? And so I think that has been happening for a while. And then since the kind of the legitimation of Mark Carney and him kind of becoming prime minister, the New Democrats are like not even in the conversation right now.
Yeah.
So that degree of like opposition that might present like a slightly, minimally more left wing version of things, is gone effectively. Sure, there's some New Democrats there, but I never hear from them. I don't hear them in the media conversation. The most I hear from a New Democrat is like on those panels of political hacks that the media do, and they need to like put an
Yeah.
NDPer on there for representation, and even then like they're not saying anything very different usually. And then you have Mark Carney and the Liberals who have embraced a more right wing politics generally, a more conservative politics. Sometimes you hear the things that these ministers are saying in the Carney government that were also ministers in the Trudeau government, and you're like, are these the same people?
I
Like,
know.
what is going on
It's
here?
scary. It's like I don't understand how you can be like, I mean, I do, I guess. Again, I'm showing my naivety in this podcast, but like I genuinely like I thought that some of these people at least had some semblance of like a clear set of morals, but seeing how quickly they can kind of shift their politics in accordance with their leader is shocking. It really is. Like yeah, sorry, I interrupted you though.
That's okay. That's why Nathan Erskine Smith only got like a month of being a cabinet minister, right? They knew
Exactly.
he wasn't gonna
Yeah, they knew he
stay
wasn't going to
on
shift.
message.
Yeah.
Exactly. Um, but then if you look at the conservatives, right? I would argue that I think you're seeing something very interesting with the conservatives. There has always been this embrace of the extreme right. For a long time you've had the social
Oh yeah.
conservatives there, and Pierre Poilievre has legitimated that more extreme part of the Conservative Party base that we associate it more with like libertarianism and stuff in the past, more of that kind of Western Canada conservatism than like, what we consider like the progressive conservatism of the East Coast or whatever. So that has long been there. For me, like you're talking about the kind of stuff that these people are tweeting. When you have someone like Pierre Poilievre tweeting that the Nazis were actually socialists because they called it National Socialism,
Ugh.
which he has done,
It's that's genuinely so
quite recently.
embarrassing. Like,
Yeah. But like as leader of the Conservative Party, he was tweeting that. Like, so to me, that's not entirely new, right?
yeah, no, you're
He
right.
has
You're
he has
right.
always been playing to these
He's been dog
people.
whistling the
And
Great Reset for years. I first reported on that, I think, in 2020. So that's like
yeah,
5 years ago.
exactly. So this is not new. And I think what we're seeing with the conservatives right now is one, they're going along with a lot of what the Liberal Party is doing because the Liberal Party has gone so much to the right. And I actually think they're still trying to find their positioning, how they reposition themselves against the Carney Liberal government. And maybe that has been delayed in part because their leader is not in Parliament. And I still think that it's an open question whether a Pierre Poilievre leadership makes sense in a
Oh
Carney
yeah.
era
Yeah.
because of what he represents, right? Like I could still see the party turfing him in the future, but I think they're going to give him that chance to come back into Parliament and see how it goes first. But to your broader point, like absolutely, things have moved more to the right, and part of that, like you were saying earlier, comes to the media conversation, and the media doesn't seem very interested in asking difficult questions about the Carney agenda and the actions of Mark Carney. Sure, they will platform Indigenous leaders who have a problem with what is going on with the national projects legislation, and what it means for Indigenous consultation and consent, and those sorts of issues. But largely, it's like this is what Mark Carney is doing, not is what Mark Carney is doing really good. And when they question it, it's usually from the right,
Yeah.
as it so often is, not like what is this actually going to mean for people? This agenda where he's cutting taxes, he's spending a ton more money, he's talking about cuts. Uh, that we know how that tends to turn out in the
Yeah.
past. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you mentioned the media because it's I think I always try to catch myself, and I've said this before on this podcast, but like because it's a personal interest of mine, obviously. But I do think that a dominant issue in all of the stuff we've talked about here is the media. I mean, like their commitment to both sidesism really facilitates a lot of the shifts that we've seen. I mean, when you are utterly committed to this both sidesism, when the political discourse shifts to the right, then you are simultaneously going to facilitate that shift and kind of not really question it because of the fact that you are concerned about avoiding that perception of bias. So if you don't move in tandem with the political discourse, then you will be the outlier and therefore perceived as, favoring one side. And I think that that's just like a huge problem that then facilitates these shifts in rhetoric that can get really transphobic, that can get really racist, especially with respect to issues like Palestine. I don't know. You and I, like, we've talked about these things ad nauseum, but I'm curious whether you agree with that's like a dominant overarching theme here, and like, how do we fix this? Like, is there hope for the media? Like, you and I both still watch it and want it to be better. So like, what do you think? Do you think that it can fix its problem, its both sidesism disease?
We'll see.
Yeah.
I would just add a few things to what you're saying, right? I
Yeah.
think that when you see this kind of both sidesism or the attempt to show an unbiased, perspective on the issues or whatever, that is shaped by political, political forces, right?
Yeah.
You have the Conservative Party frequently attacking the media as being too left wing, as being against their interests. I haven't heard the NDP attack the media as being too right wing,
Yeah.
which I would argue it is, and that actually the attacks from the Conservatives that they're too left wing cause the media to move more in a right wing direction
Yeah. To
because they don't
overcorrect.
want to be accused of that bias.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so we see that time and again. I would say, to add to what you're saying though, another issue that I have with the media and that I feel like I see more and more is just that when you think about political media, you think about people who are in the bubble of Ottawa, who have particular relationships, are speaking to particular issues, who are speaking to particular people about the issues of the day, and thus are hearing what the different political parties are thinking about those issues, but not necessarily thinking beyond that or thinking about a broader discussion of what these issues might mean for people, what these decisions might mean for people. And I think that really impoverishes the discourse because you have media figures who have relationships with powerful people, with politicians, who chum around with them, who buddy around with them. And I think that impoverishes, not just journalism, but the discourse and what Canadians hear about the issues that are important to us, right? That are going to affect our lives. And it's a very small thing, but I think that you can very clearly see that in the recent discussions about the longest ballot initiative, right? All
Yeah.
of these people kind of putting their names forward to go on the ballot. I'm not even saying it's an initiative I think is great or worthwhile or that I
I
think
hate
is
it.
useful, right?
I find it so annoying.
I don't
But
I don't
yeah.
like it either.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there is a consensus among politicians and political media people that this is abhorrent, that this is terrible. If you watch the clips, one of the first things they tend to do when they talk about this is pull out the ballot from the Carleton riding and say, "Look at how many names are on this. Look at how big it is. How can anyone possibly vote this way?" And in so doing, they're not just repeating, the narratives of the political class, that benefit from not having a longest ballot initiative or something like that, but are really not having that broader conversation of what do people outside of Parliament Hill think about this? What do academics think about this? And I would argue that in taking and adopting the perspective of these politicians on what the longest ballot initiative is, again, not even being particularly a supporter of it, that they have legitimized a restriction in democratic rights. Sure, it's a very small
Yeah.
thing, right? How many signatures or whatnot that you need to run on a ballot. But I would say that they have contributed to the legitimization of a very small curtailment of democratic rights in the country, by using arguments that I think are not always the most valid, but are certainly annoying for certain political leaders and political parties.
Yeah, I have to say, like, I have vented about the longest ballot initiative, and I have a lot of issues with it. But I was really concerned when I saw Pierre Poilievre talking about wanting to legislate around this, because I do think that once you get into the realm of legislating who can put their name on a ballot, like that is a big thing to dig into and try to put limitations on that are stricter than what we currently have. So that kind of made me my laugh turn into a so it's a really good point.
It's like not thinking through the implications of the narratives that they amplify, right?
Yeah.
And the positions that they take. And we could talk about a ton of examples of that. Obviously, it was kind of shocking, or soon after October 7th, in seeing the way that the media was presenting Israel, right,
Yeah.
and not believing, the very credible reports from Gaza about what the Israeli army was doing, right? And it came much later that they started to kind of wake up to what was actually happening and being like, oh, maybe the Israelis are lying to us. But even then, you
Maybe.
still see Israel gets the benefit of the doubt in
Yeah.
in a lot of this reporting,
Oh,
right? The
absolutely.
recent kind of talk about how Israel is going to start allowing more humanitarian aid and all this kind of stuff, right? The media, politicians, they all grabbed onto that, even though we have seen this story many times before. We know how it plays out. We know it's going to be a trickle and it's going to be useless
Yeah.
because their goal is starvation and genocide.
Yeah. And you're
The
helping
media
them
is
to
very frustrating.
obfuscate that when you
Exactly.
accept their narrative. So yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of really important conversations from the media, Justin Trudeau and Katy Perry. I couldn't finish this conversation without us touching on the biggest political news story that has rocked North America. Do you think they're a good match? What do you think?
They probably are a good match,
I
which
know,
is
I
terrible.
think so too. And I kind of think that's like insulting to both of them.
I also think I think Justin Trudeau dating Katy Perry is kind of like an insult to Canadians, personally. Like, this is our former
I
prime
thought there
minister.
were
He should
rumors he
not
was
be
dating
shaming
someone
us in
from
this way.
Newfoundland, like that would
This
be
is
so
what I
much more
thought. Yeah,
patriotic. No wonder you're extra
I
pissed,
know.
eh?
Yeah. There were like rumors he was down here and was dating. So I don't know. Maybe that was all bullshit. I
The
have no idea. This is what was
small town
circulating.
chit chat, like rumors
Exactly.
spreading like
Exactly.
wildfire around the rock.
Yeah. But it's like, I don't know, Justin, like, what are you doing, man? Come on. Like, it's disappointing. And I think it's actually interesting because it's also a media story in a way, right?
Yeah.
This is the kind of stuff that Canadian media does not report on because there's kind of like an accepted uh kind of, I don't know, truce is not the right word, but it's kind of accepted between media and the political class that the personal lives of the politicians
Mm.
are, out of bounds unless it becomes political, right? The only reason I think that this story was really picked up on and reported in Canada is because you had TMZ and stuff reporting on it in the States. And so then, the publications up here were like, okay, I guess we need to publish a story on this. But I think otherwise, like, it just would have been something that circulates online and that we all kind of know, but that doesn't really get, I guess, legitimized in this way, right?
Only Paris could find a way to turn the Justin Trudeau Katy Perry story into a broader criticism of the state of our media ecosystem in Canada and the
Not
way we
even a
report
criticism.
politics.
I,
No, but
I actually think
it's
it's
true.
okay
Like
that they don't report on the
I don't
personal
know, but
lives,
I
right?
do think that there's a line that like sometimes that facilitates a lack of reporting on things that do matter. Like to give you an example, like Anaida
Sure.
Polyev she's been doing like this weird trad wife blog. And I'm not seeing like I've
Yeah.
reported on it a little bit, but I'm not really seeing people touch on that. And I think that that's really significant because she's turning out to be a pretty prominent female figure in the conservative movement in this country. And like by not touching on that, we're kind of ignoring something that I think is a brewing issue that will potentially worsen. So so maybe there is something
No,
to having
fair
a
enough.
legitimate critique of the Justin Trudeau Katy Perry pair. Oh my god. I also
I would just
honestly
say,
it
Justin,
told
don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it.
call the nuns, Justin. Check in with the
Yeah.
nuns. They have stories. Anyway.
Oh, right. This is the right. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Did you know about? Yeah, right. We were texting about the nun thing a little bit. I don't
Yeah.
know
I did
how.
not know until people were in my replies yesterday being like, she's a nun killer. I was like, what are you guys all talking about? I am
I
yeah.
mean, to be fair, I do think there's apparently more to that story than what has circulated,
Oh, I'm
in the
sure. Yeah.
headlines. But yeah, she did. There was a legal battle between her trying to purchase like land or a convent or something, and a nun apparently did die, and before dying said, "Please, Katy Perry, stop," or something like that. There's an incredible Washington Post headline on it. But anyway, on this note, I'm
Maybe if we
glad
want
that
to do
we.
the positive spin, we could just say the former prime minister might be dating an astronaut, Like
Paris. Oh my
I'm
God.
sorry. I'm
He's
sorry.
dating Julie Payette? Let's start a new rumor. Okay, well, on this note of a little bit of levity after we talked about some pretty heavy stuff, this is the season finale of Bubble Pop. So people are going to have to wait a few weeks at least until they get a little more of me at least. And I don't know, you can probably find Paris everywhere. Paris is always working, but
Yeah. I'm I'm still gonna have episodes. Yeah.
yeah. Paris
Does
will
this
actually
mean the
be.
bubble has popped and you need to like blow a new one for
Yeah,
the next
I got to
season?
get some more. I don't even know what is that bubble juice. Like,
Bubble
I
juice.
don't know what you call it. But Paris, I want to thank you so much for coming on and for helping me bookend this show. Before I tell people or have you like promote yourself and everything, do you have something you want to share that made you feel good over the time that this podcast has happened that is unrelated to this podcast? But like, what is something that made you feel hope or joy in the last like 6 months?
Yeah, that's a big question.
I know.
When you said feel good, I was gonna say, yeah, watching you get screeched in and kiss a fish. That was funny. But
That was traumatizing, is what it was. But I'm an honorary Newfoundlander now, so
you
yeah,
are. Something that is good. Seeing Elon Musk and Donald Trump get into a big fight. That was funny. That was a
that
bit
was
that was
really
a bit
fun.
hopeful, right?
That was a good day.
Yeah.
Definitely a good day. Yeah. Yeah, and I didn't even think about this. I think it's just my dogs always make me happy. So that's probably just my
There you
answer. It's
go.
just the existence of dogs and specifically my dogs, Charlie and Honey, the best dogs in the world. Sorry, we can fight about it.
Love it. I built a Lord of the Rings Rivendell Lego set. That made me very happy,
It looks
actually.
amazing. For those of you who are listening on audio, it is a
Thank you.
very beautiful and intricate set. So you'll have to head over to YouTube and watch the actual video because it is
It was a
incredible.
lot of work, but
Yeah.
it was great. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Paris, where can people keep up with you until your next appearance on Bubble Pop when I've got more juice?
I host a podcast called Tech Won't Save Us. I have a newsletter called Disconnect. I post way too much on Blue Sky, and I've started to like post some clips just from my podcast on like Instagram and TikTok and
Yeah.
stuff. But it's not very much yet.
I love that you're on TikTok. It makes me so happy every time I see your posts. If you guys follow me, I'm always reposting Paris's posts. So, that's one way to find Paris, but you can also just search Paris Marx.
I don't
Well,
even talk in the clips. It's the guests. So
you should do just like maybe do some trends, do some dancing. Let's see a little
oh
more
my God,
Paris
no.
personality.
That
Maybe
is
like
not
a live
happening.
stream of you building your Lego, your Lord of the Rings
Wow,
Lego.
it's
I'd
a bit
watch
too
that.
late now. I've already built it.
You're gonna have to get another. It's an investment.
Maybe
Yeah.
after I write this book, maybe we'll
Yeah,
see.
true. All right. Well, Paris, thank you so much for helping me close out this season. I appreciate it.
Of course, happy to do it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Bubble Pop. I'm Rachel Gilmore, your least favorite person's least favorite journalist. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing to Bubble Pop on YouTube, Patreon, Substack, or wherever you like to listen. You can also find me on TikTok, Instagram, Twitch, and Blue Sky. I'd like to say a special thank you to Hans Vivian Wenzel for making the incredibly groovy music for Bubble Pop. You can find more of his stuff on Spotify under the artist name Hans. That's lowercase h with an exclamation mark. Thank you so much for spending the first season of my podcast with me. I have always wanted to do this, and you guys made it possible. So I am incredibly grateful to each and every one of you. Thank you so much. And I will see you back here for season 2. See you soon.